to him. And so we got home, and he came into our room, and he just said, you know, can I come in? And we were like, absolutely. Came to the threshold of our bedroom door, and he just went into this litany of lament. I'm tired of people killing each other. I'm tired of people hurting each other. Is there anything that we can do? And we, you know, welcomed him in our room and had some conversation with him. But a few weeks later, on a plane to speak in Los Angeles, and I'm still holding that conversation, and I needed to release it. And took pen to paper before we touched down. I just handed it to my wife and said, you know, check this out. And she said, well, I think you have something here. And so that's really what began this journey in children's book writing.
Well, the funny part of that story, the ending, I'm still moved by how Mike wrote about this in the actual book, because when I went to the introduction to this book at the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville virtually, and the artist was there, and you were there, I think everybody was virtual, mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Because when Mike wrote this, the video that you just saw is represented in the artist's artwork, so you must have given her the video, right. Mm-hmm. And she represented it so beautifully. And but Jeremiah didn't want to talk is kind of the running theme. So what Mike just told you about when Jeremiah finally came into their bedroom was a long process, it sounded like.
Right, over several years.
And I didn't mean to say funny, but Mike had written this, and I didn't know how you'd written it, and handed it to Elise and said, so evidently, from what I understand, he posted it on Facebook, I've written a children's story, does anybody know anything? So my friend and former student, Laura Heifetz, was working for Westminster John Knox in marketing, and she's evidently a Facebook friend with you, and says, oh, well, we've got a publisher. And so she gets it to David Dobson at Flyaway Books, which is the children's imprint for Westminster John Knox Press, our press, Presbyterian Press, was just at the beginning stages. They knew they wanted to start a children's imprint, but they had not yet done it. And David Dobson, it got to David through Laura.
Right. I've known Laura for a long time, and Laura, she said, send it to me. I said, well, I think I have something here. I'm not sure. I've never written a children's book. I'll send you the manuscript, just look at it. And maybe about 10 minutes later, I had a direct message. She says, Mike, I'm crying. We got to do this. And, that began that journey. And then, of course, David saw it, and I was very grateful for that embrace. And then a few weeks later, David's like, I think we can find a partner with the Muhammad Ali Center. Let me send it over. And then next thing I know, Lonnie Ali, Muhammad Ali's widow, is reading it. She says, yeah, we've got to do this. So just kind of amazing journey towards publication, but all originating really with the voice of our son. And I hope that I represented that voice well. A lot of people say, how did you write this book? I said, well, I felt more like a recorder, just sharing our experience as a family that ultimately led to this book. And
each of the scenes, but Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore.
Right, Jeremiah.
And that's a repetitive. Has anybody else read it and used it? Yeah. It's a repetitive line, but Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore, so it builds and it builds and it builds.
Right. And as it would happen, and providentially, you name it, of course, George Floyd happens. George Floyd is killed. Yeah. I've since been connected with the Floyd family, and I actually was the keynote speaker for their weekend of encouragement this past May. But George Floyd happens, and the book doesn't come out till the fall, but there's such a need for resources. People are like, how do we have this conversation with our young people? So I really appreciate Flyaway Books. For those of you who read it, for those of you who have not, there is an activity and discussion guide in the back authored by the Muhammad Ali Center. And we just put that out immediately for free and added a coloring sheet because so many people were reaching out saying, how do we have this conversation? What do we do to engage our young people?
Yeah, because I remember in our conversation, it was September of 2020, and the book was still not quite out yet, but the Muhammad Ali Center had already put out the accompanying pages and the study guide and leader's guide that is now printed in the book. And I remember our conversation with the students, we were saying, we need it right now.
And part of the reason the engagement that you saw online was delayed was the day that we were supposed to have our initial forum. Not the verdict, but the grand jury spoke for Breonna Taylor in Louisville. And so there were protests, so we had to postpone it. And so there was just a bombardment. You all remember this. It was Ahmaud Arbery, it was Breonna Taylor, it was George Floyd. There was so many things happening, and many other names. And so the book seemed to come out at the right time, if you will. And it was amazing to see the various ways that people engaged it, interestingly, both nationally and internationally.
Internationally as well.
Yeah, someone did it in Indonesia. It was a part of their doctoral dissertation. I never would have thought that, but they were studying Black Lives Matter and activities, and they included it in the book. People all over received it. Essence Magazine put it on their must-read books list, 6 must-read books. The Wilbur Award was given to it for Children's Book of the Year, and it got the Children's Book Council's inaugural Youth Book Prize for Social Justice. So just the ways in which people engaged it, sent pictures, reading it with their children, saying that it was a ready resource to help children navigate issues of racial violence, gun violence, as well as police brutality.
I'm just so glad this book is here, because in the environment in which we live and continue to live, with those shootings that just happened in the last, every day.
Right.
And you posted a poem on your Facebook page, "America is a Gun." If you want to follow Mike on his Facebook page, I shared that and put it on mine. Every country is knowing what it's for, and America is a gun.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah is now 18?
16. Don't grow him up too fast. Although I have maybe 3 more months before he's taller than me.
He's looking pretty tall and thin.
Yeah,
Tall and slender,
he's an amazing young man. We're very proud of him. And
how has that affected him? Because one of the lines in the book that really gets to me, when you were going out to speak at the rally that you showed us, he asks you, "Who died now?"
Who died now?
Who died now? Who died now? He said, "Who died now?" Who died now is the question before Mike leaves to go to the rally that he played for us.
Yeah, we've had some, our children have they've shared some pretty heartbreaking things, to be honest with you, in their observation of the world. Jeremiah asked, I was on my way, literally, it was another occasion, the death, unfortunately, of both and John, whose family I know and have worked alongside. And I'm hitting the door. I said, I've got to go. Something's happened. And his response was, "Who died now?" Hope, remember picking her up at school, and she, kind of bounces into the car, and just a very vibrant young lady. But then she, gets buckled in, and she says, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Are we going back to slavery?" I'm like, okay. That happens because we see children in cages and trying to understand what that means. With Liberty, as we're looking at television and I'm watching the news after the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and she comes, sits down by me, and we try to be very honest and transparent with our kids. We want to try to translate what's happening in ways that they can understand, but we don't feel like it's necessary to shield them in a sense from everything that's happening. They've got to know what's happening in the world. And she just sits down. After a while, she says, "So they killed him for jogging?" I said, yeah. She said, "That doesn't make it for jogging. That doesn't make sense. What did he do? He didn't do anything. He didn't hurt anybody. No. He didn't take it. No. He was just running." And so those are the kind of questions. Then a year later, again with Liberty, she walks in and she sees fire on the Capitol Hill, and she says, "Is this a movie?" And the reason it touched her so powerfully, this is, of course, January 6th, was that I was invited to be the guest chaplain for the U.S. House of Representatives. And we took our family and, had the privilege of praying for the House, praying for the Congressional Black Caucus. We went to the White House, went to the Supreme Court, went all these places. And so she was intimately familiar, and she felt very special in that, the church was so excited. One of our church members bought our girls, new dresses, and, and it was one of her favorite things. So it was just a very important memory.
Yeah.
And she felt it very deeply that this place that she had these wonderful memories in was on fire.
It's being destroyed.
Right, being destroyed. And so, and of course, justice is only two, but, I'm just, holding my breath. I'm sure there's some things he's going to inquire of us that are going to demand a response. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to turn on to Liberty and her adventure. But before I do, I want to see if there are any questions in the room or questions from our virtual participants or a comment.
We just had a request from those online for both of y'all to speak up.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you need to use the mic.
Yeah, I am. I turned it on. I'm using it. Anybody in the room have a question or virtual for Mike before we turn to Liberty's Civil Rights Road Trip? Yes.
More of a comment than a question. I really want to thank you. We've used both the books as children's sermons at our church, and when we read the Beautiful Black Boys book, there were people crying in the congregation. It was just amazing.
Wow.
The comment is that, tell me your name.
Melissa.
Melissa's used both books in the congregation, reading them to children of all ages, as I like to say, and just incredible response of tears, emotions, as they were read.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit, Michael, about how you create the sense of hope with your children, because from the stories you just shared, they're so surrounded by the violence
Right.
because of who they are.
Well, I think both of these
How does
books-
Michael create a sense of hope for his children because they're surrounded by so much violence that they see and around them?
Sure, I think both books capture an aspect of hope. At the end of For Beautiful Black Boys, there is a litany of activities that one can engage in order to change the world. So we don't just leave children with the sense that we're powerless to push back or to resist or to envision a better world. There are things that not only can be done, but are being done on a daily basis. And so, not only do we talk about those things, but in many ways, my wife and I attempt to emulate those things before them in our daily activity within the context of our faith community, the activities that we're engaged in. And then, they have a community of uncles and aunts, if you will, across the country who are likewise engaged in movement. They've met some incredible people. I tell them all the time that, if I had only had the exposure that you've had at your age, what would the trajectory of my life been? They've met some, just absolute, truth be, and we'll get to Liberty Civil Rights Road Trip in just a little bit, but there are only two individuals who are still alive who were with Dr. King on the day he was assassinated, Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young. And they met both of them in Memphis on the 50th anniversary of his assassination. And that's just, so it's quite often the case that we're watching something and maybe historical documentary, and I'll say, you've been there. They're like, yeah, we've been there. Or I say, you've met that person, or you met someone who knew them. So there's this sense of a great cloud of witnesses even, that we're part of this ongoing commitment to justice. And so I think that they have, in their own way, found hope through action and through movement. Certainly they still have questions and certainly the things that still trouble them. But I think they understand that we change the world through our work together. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for the covers of the books. There's something powerful about having that book on display for all the walks by, saying beautiful black boys and seeing an image. It's something we can't do, but the book does. Even if they don't read it like we hope they do. Just walking by the images, because there's not enough images, positive images to get to walk by.
Thank you for that. That may be the only, and it was not even a tug of war, but that was the only question that the publisher had was, this title, because it's so long. It's a long title. And I said, we have to have the title for this very purpose. The title itself, when you speak it, it's an affirmation. And that was my hope, and I'm very grateful to see that. We were at very quickly, we were at the dentist recently, our dentist, and there's a children's section. And I didn't know this, but the dentist, has the book in the children's section, right? And it was so amazing because I'm thinking, the little kids are coming here for their dental appointments, and they're also getting this sense of affirmation. And let me be clear, the persons who've read this book have not just been, Black families of all types, all formations, all ethnicities, all races have engaged this book, and it's been very powerful to see.
Publishers really don't want authors to have much to do with covers or art or titles. I've fought for titles myself, and sometimes I've won and sometimes I've lost. And Michael, I think your fighting for this title was really important. And fortunately, one of the things I love about Flyaway Books is their intentionality about art. And I think your comment about when you see a cover like this, it draws you in and maybe it makes you want to read. And I think you should be shameless at take these books wherever you go. Dentist's office, doctor's office. I've given copies, in Nashville to one of my doctors who has young children because I say, oh, here, this is a friend of mine wrote this. I think your child would like it. And just shameless because I'm just so proud of what our press is doing. Back to what the previous question about hope, and you talked about hope through action and how do you help your children move through difficult issues. And I guess I come back to that comment you made about Jeremiah walking in your room, and after all those times when he just wasn't ready to talk, and finally and you said he just opened up with this lament.
Right.
Do we let children lament? Do we invite that space for them to lament? Or even ourselves, or do we? And I think that's so important. I think what you and Ulysses are doing as parents, which is a great model for all of us, and hopefully we're all doing it too, is allowing that space for children's voices to be heard, to bring the lament and not try to avoid it, but to invite them into that space.
We don't always, as a general statement, grieve well. We try to rush to the end of the process or try to mute the pain altogether. And that's damaging,
It is.
I think, for us, particularly for children. It creates a trauma that we carry into our adulthood. And so we attempt to create an atmosphere within our home where we can be honest with our feelings, honest with our emotions, where questions are welcome, and where, as part of our transparency and honesty, we don't try to rush to contrived answers. For some things, there aren't an immediate answer. And sometimes we have to sit, frankly, with the weight and tension of the challenge before us, but with the hope that collectively together we'll get towards change.
It's that sitting in with wrestling that they're learning to do before they rush to something. It's really important. Well, let's turn to Liberty. And so tell us a little bit about, yes.
There is just one comment from one of the folks
Sure.
online, and then a question. So Hope, Candace says, hope for me comes to relationships. It may be the best thing for children as well to have positive relationships with people of all cultures and backgrounds. Knowing one another brings hope and a sense of identity.
Certainly.
So hope comes through from relationships.
And
The-
and then a question, which they say we may not be able to answer, is there a special 2023 event discount code for books through the marketplace books?
Is there what? A 20?
We'll try to figure out an answer to that. That doesn't relate.
No, I
to
don't know
Sorry,
it does.
I started reading it before I
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all working. So So you had this one, and now you had a publisher. And my one comment about publishing in children's books is it's much easier to get a book like this published than it is a children's book. The children's book market is a really competitive place, and so we are so fortunate. I feel so grateful that first of all, I'm grateful to my friend David Dobson and Laura Heifetz, who we share a mutual affection for, who helped get For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World into our hands. And so you tell us about how you came to write. Well, maybe I guess we begin with, you took your family on a civil rights road trip. Mike's been taking groups from the Dallas area to the civil rights road trip for years, many years. And you made a comment in my class that I've never forgotten. So I'll just lead off with this one. You said, somehow the civil rights missed Texas. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I did. I do remember that. And more specifically, Dallas. And let me qualify the statement. Historically, when one thinks of the civil rights movement, you think of the engagement and activity of the black church, of black pastors and congregations leading out and organizing. Certainly, they weren't the only persons. You had a student movement, of course. You had activity within the courts. There are a lot of different people doing work, even the business community. But largely, we think of it as a faith-led movement. Unfortunately, in Dallas, and interestingly enough, there's a book that if you're interested in reading, it's called the most dangerous book ever written about Dallas. It's called The Accommodation by Jim Schultz. And it really recounts how an agreement was made between the white business establishment and black religious leadership after a series of bombings in Dallas to quell those bombings, but then to also quell community demands. And so basically, the white business establishment said, we'll stop the bombings as long as you keep your community in check. And that was the agreement.
Which means no protest.
No protest.
No protest, no
activity.
No activity, no.
And I think this is the only major city in the country.
What year?
This is going to be during the 50s, and it extends, even beyond the Kennedy assassination and going forward. Where this agreement is made, and it has had disastrous effects on our community today. As a matter of fact, the Urban Institute came out with a report in April 25th of 2018, where they researched racial segregation and racial inequity in 274 American cities with a population of 100,000 residents or more, and the city of Dallas came in dead last. 274 out of 274 American cities. If you look at just about every race indicator study in America, from childhood poverty to housing, Dallas is either at the very bottom or near the bottom. And that's because of that history of racism. But I think it was able to take deeper root because we did not have a strong resistance during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. It was so bad, and some say this is a rumor, although I can confirm it's true, that Dr. King actually came to Dallas and on the tarmac was met by some black ministers telling him he wasn't welcome to come and to be a part of the protest.
Because they had agreed to the covenant or whatever you want to call it.
Called the accommodation.
All the accommodation.
So interestingly now, the city of Dallas is trying to do some things now. We've got a long way to go, but there was a series. It became a reading now for the entire city. And believe it or not, back in September, I was on a panel with Robert Jeffers, pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, that is also prominently mentioned in that book, and its pastor working against integration. And I have several artifacts that I use in my talks. And so in this particular talk, I brought a Klan hood, and I brought a Make America Great Again hat, and I held them together as representations of each other in having this conversation with Robert Jeffers, who was sitting right to my left. That made a bit of a buzz.
Well, I would say so.
But that's why I made that mention. There were activities. There was a student movement led by Juanita Craft to desegregate the State Fair of Texas. But this massive particularly being here in Birmingham, this massive movement within the churches we really did not see in Dallas.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Memphis and lived in Alabama for 11 years before I moved to the south side of Chicago. And those of us who've lived in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, the Carolinas to some extent, Georgia, this land is
Brian Stevenson calls it an open crime scene.
open, yeah. Yeah, Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Brian Stevenson.
Right.
It's soaked in the blood of, yeah. So you started bringing groups from Dallas to, so your first trip to the civil rights, was that journey?
The first journey we planned was in 2005. I did so as an assistant chaplain at Southern Methodist University. I wanted to work on issues of racial justice and racial reconciliation. And the chaplain at the time, Dr. Finnan, said, dream big. And so my idea, because at the time there was these series of anniversaries, I think at the time 40-year anniversaries for the civil rights movement, I said it would be amazing to take a generation that was born after these activities to actually not just visit these locations, but to meet individuals who engage in movement, both celebrated names as well as those foot soldiers whose names few people remember, but who contributed so greatly to our liberation. And so that's where we began. I led that and directed that for 3 years, and then began providing that similar experience more broadly for the community or for churches, organizations that contacted me wanting to have that experience.
So you and your lease must have decided it was time to take Jeremiah, Hope, and Liberty.
So funny story. Jeremiah was in utero for his very first pilgrimage. The next pilgrimage, and this is, I'll try to say this as quickly as I can. Amelia Boynton Robinson. Anyone know that name, Amelia Boynton Robinson? Amelia Boynton Robinson lived to be over 100 years old. You've seen her picture. If you've ever seen pictures of Bloody Sunday in Selma, and you see a woman kind of passed out on the ground, that's Amelia Boynton Robinson, a very central figure in the voting rights struggle in Selma, probably single-handedly responsible for actually bringing Dr. King to Selma. We lose that history, unfortunately, with the women in the movement. We tend to give all the credit to the men, but she was just an amazing woman, and frankly, a hit was put out on her on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's why a trooper emptied an entire canister of tear gas into her lungs at point-blank range, damaged her vocal cords forever. So we're leading the pilgrimage, and we're at the National Voting Rights Museum, and there's this wonderful elderly woman sitting in the corner, and Jeremiah at the time must be, at this time he may be 6 or 7 months old. And she reaches for him as only a black grandmother could. We didn't know this woman from anybody else, but it was like, yes, ma'am. And we just hand over our child to her, and she's just holding him and rocking him as we're moving about in this space. And another just dear friend and mentor, Joanne Bland, who's also on the bridge, and I may say more about her later, she comes to me and she kind of hits me. She says, you know who that is, right? I said, I have absolutely no idea. Please let me know. She said, that's Amelia Boynton Robinson. And immediately my eyes just swell with tears, because I sometimes see the world symbolically. And what I see happening is that she is literally in her arms carrying this generation forward like she carried us as she went across the bridge. And so one of the features of our pilgrimages is we always march across the bridge together. And I had a baby Bajorn, had Jeremiah on my front. So I'm carrying my son across the bridge. And before we hit the crest of that bridge, I mean, I'm weeping. The tears just won't stop flowing. It was just this amazing intersection of the past and the present and the future. And I thought about the sermon that I had preached at the historic Brown Chapel there in Selma, an anecdote within an anecdote, the most intimidated I've ever been in preaching, not because of the size of the crowd, but because of the space And literally, when I approached the lectern to preach, there are these imprints of feet. And I had to wrestle with the fact that King stood here, Coretta stood here, Malcolm X stood here. Like all these people, Jesse Jackson was a preacher the week before I was.
You followed Jesse
Right.
Jackson?
And I'm thinking, can I stand here? You know. And so the sermon I preached was another bridge to cross. Idea that our work was not done. But anyway, you know, carrying him across that bridge and having that experience with Amelia Boynton Robinson. So there's a chapter dedicated to her in my book, Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America, because she's just an unsung hero. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we had many encounters like that across our years.
Yeah, there's so many unsung heroes. And I love what you said about the unknown women. One of the stories I would love to write, but I've got notes about it. It was the woman who cooked the meals.
Oh yes, in Montgomery.
In Montgomery.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking
yes,
about?
I do.
My sister, I think you mentioned her once in a sermon. I don't know, I've kept all these notes.
Raised him in recent past, maybe 5 years ago, where was raising funds for the movement through her cooking. The whole Montgomery bus boycott was a woman-led initiative. The preachers just ran out in front because they'd already...
They ran out in front because the work had been done?
They'd already gone forward, and the preacher's like, well, let's get in front of this, because this looks like a good thing
And
to
she
do.
had this cooking thing going in her home,
Right.
and Dr. King and whoever was traveling with him would just show up, and she would be doing her meatloaf and mashed, and she'd call on her friends, right? Isn't that the
Yes,
story? She'd call on her
absolutely.
friends, bring the food in?
Right, Peaches Cafe in Jackson. There's just this amazing history of people, and particularly women, who were so central to the movement. Vera Harris and we can go on and on.
Oh,
and
yeah,
on.
yeah.
But the amazing thing is that over the years of the pilgrimage, even Sarah Collins Rudolph, right here in Birmingham, one of the fifth little girl, if you will, from the bombing.
Oh, yeah.
Who know her and her family, have worked alongside them as well. They have these amazing stories, and a part of our pilgrimage experience has been to weave ourselves into that narrative and see ourselves as a part of the ongoing work for justice.
Right. Well, let's turn to Liberty. So I've asked Mike to read it to you so you can hear in his voice. And one of the things I know about when you write children's books is sometimes you don't often get a chance to read your own book to an audience. I think it's just wonderfully engaging. And if I ask him if he wants to pause and make a comment on any page, he can, about something he sees now, or because the art comes in after we've written a children's story, and we do have some say about art, and we can reject or keep suggestions, though they really don't like us as authors to reject the art that they've already paid for. So sometimes when you see your words with the art that's been selected, which you see things you might that look differently when the two come together. So for our virtual participants, I'm going to be showing it as it is available on Kindle, and I'm going to be showing that as Mike reads it.
And let me say this, a quick nod to both Keisha Morris and Nicole Tadgill, tremendous illustrators in their own right. I very much so appreciate Flyaway Books' commitment to my hope to have Black women illustrators to illustrate these books. They did so. I'm grateful, but these are tremendous pieces of art, and I'm very grateful. This book was inspired by our 50th anniversary pilgrimage through the Deep South, 50th anniversary King Memorial Pilgrimage, where I was honored to lead a group of faith leaders in this pilgrimage, but our children went as well, my children as well as the children of a dear friend and brother, Dr. Imam Omar Suleiman. And the impetus or the inspiration for the book, again, I've been leading these pilgrimages for so many years, but not with so many small children. And seeing these spaces through their eyes was just radically transformed every space we were in. I found myself just mesmerized by their innocence, their inquiry, and even their courage in these very harrowing spaces. And it just demanded a response. And so this is one of the responses, and this is Liberty Civil Rights Road Trip.
Question, two questions. One is, did you prepare the parents, because Liberty's friend and the father of Liberty's friend went. Did you prepare them for in any way for how they would be with their children on this trip?
You know, we did not specifically. Interestingly enough, I think our children and Imam's children,
Yeah.
because of what we've done,
They were already prepared.
They're already ready.
They're already ready.
Seen some things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you know, he had a very, you know, obviously very similar experience,
Sure.
and so they had a maybe heightened sense of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
What we did though do is we, you know, of course, had an open dialogue throughout. And again, the genius of children is unlimited, right? I just find so much through their eyes, and I'm happy to share this with you.
Is that a good capture of Liberty on the cover?
You know what? I think this is the very similar hairdo to what she had in D.C. I think the author found that, which I found pretty cool. The energy, the enthusiasm that come beaming through the eyes, that's absolutely Liberty. Liberty, even she's an athlete now. She plays basketball, boundless energy. She's very proud of her. She's in the talented, gifted program. Mine is questions, rapid fire. She's just a very energetic young lady, which brings a lot of joy to us. And so that is certainly captured in the picture.
Remind us of how the ages of Liberty, Hope, and Jeremiah on this trip. What ages are they?
Okay, so this would be in 2018, 5 years ago. So Liberty would have been, she would
She looks
almost
about
returning-
8.
No, she was not 8.
Oh,
She
no.
was 5.
Oh, she was 5.
She was
Wow.
5. Yeah, she was 5 at the time.
So
Yeah,
and
just turned
Hope
5.
was.
5. She would have been 7 on the way to 8.
This is the test.
Yeah, and I'm having to, yes. And
And Jeremiah would have been.
He would have been 10.
So 5, 7, and 10.
Uh-huh.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So Liberty's Civil Rights Road Trip by myself, Michael W. Waters, and illustrated by Nicole Tadgill. Liberty woke up from a nap on the bus. "Are we there yet, Mom?" "Not yet," said her mother. "We have a few hours left." "Where is there again?" asked Liberty. Her mom chuckled. "The first stop is Jackson, Mississippi." "Is Jackson where we crossed the bridge that you and Daddy told me about?" "Not yet. Not until Selma." "I can't wait," said Liberty. "I love bridges." Liberty turned and saw all the friendly people she'd met when they boarded the bus together in Dallas, Texas. Miss Rachel, with her long locks, sat next to Mr. Adam. Miss Alia sat in front of Dr. Glenn and near other new friends. The driver was Mr. Joe. Liberty's mom, dad, brother, and sister were on the bus, and so was her friend Abdullah and his family. Everyone was ready for their civil rights road trip. Liberty was glad Abdullah was with her. She always called him her cousin, even though they weren't related. They sat together playing games as hills, lakes, rivers, and trees passed by. A long time later, Abdullah asked, "Mom, are we there yet?" "We're here," said his mom. "Welcome to Jackson, Mississippi." The bus stopped at a small house, and everyone piled out. Liberty liked the house's aqua color, which reminded her of the ocean. "Whose house is this?" she asked. Miss Rachel said, "Medgar Evers lived here a long time ago. He was a brave soldier in World War II, and he later worked for black people to have the right to vote here in Mississippi." "My mom and dad take me with them to vote," Liberty exclaimed. "Mine too," said Abdullah. After everyone had visited the house and heard more about Medgar Evers, the bus left for the next stop. I will add an anecdote here. Have any of you ever gone to Medgar Evers' home in Jackson? It's amazing how architecture can also be the embodiment of a response to racism and white supremacy. I'll say very quickly. The top of the house is gravel. It's very interesting. You don't normally see a gravel-topped house. The reason it's there is in case a bomb was to be thrown on top. You could hear it clanking up top. There's no front entrance. There's no front door where you would normally have the placement. They designed the home. You enter the door from under the carport to go in through the side. Another means of protection.
So they designed the home for their own safety.
Right.
Knowing,
Remember, Medgar Evers is the first field secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi.
so he designed a home where his family would be safe.
Right. The refrigerator is placed in front of the back door. The children's beds, the mattresses are on the floor. So if anyone shot into the home, it would not be impacted. And what happened that fateful night, the reason he was killed, or what really led to his assassination, was that they forgot to turn the light off. The porch light was never supposed to be on under the carport. And so when you pulled up into the driveway, the family knew that everybody was to exit out on the passenger side, to walk low beside the wall, and then to go into the door under that carport.
Is that what we see in this house, this blue house, where
That's right.
that's the carport and that's the
carport.
entrance?
That's right. And so what happened that fateful night is that he was exhausted, got out of the driver's side, and went to the back of the vehicle to get some T-shirts out for the next day's rally and put him in the sight of assassins who had been waiting, for some time. But that's just, that's something that unless you've been there, you don't know that. But as a young child, when you walk into the children's rooms and you see the beds on the floor, you ask, why are the beds on the floor? And you have to have the conversation of the threats that were there upon that family.
So one question about the artist. For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World, the artist got to see the video of you at the vigil, and that's recreated in this lovely piece of art in there.
Right.
It's a visual representation of what you actually did. Did you? Did you talk with her about the architecture of Medgar Evers' house?
I don't think we had a specific conversation, but we sent pictures of our trips and our journey, and she had those readily available. But that did not enter into our dialogue, no. Yeah.
Never. Did any of y'all know that history of the architecture of the house? That's new for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As miles passed, Liberty saw how the land changed from dark brown to nearly red. "Are we almost there, Dad?" she asked. "Yes, Liberty, we're here," said her dad. "Welcome to Glendora, Mississippi." The bus stopped at a building Liberty thought looked like a giant metal barn. Her dad told her that this place had been a cotton gin where seeds were removed from cotton after it was picked. They were there to remember a boy named Emmett Till, whose death years ago had inspired many others to stand up for the rights of black people. Liberty was surprised that Emmett hadn't been much older than her brother. As everyone heard about Emmett Till, Liberty and Abdullah curled up in their mother's arms. It had been a long day. You can journey to the Interpret Center in the Glendora today. That's the place, unfortunately, where the corpse of Emmett Till was brought back before being dropped into the Black River Bayou. And that's just a powerful, we've gone there, we've gone to the place where his body was retrieved from, where it surfaced down river. But I think the most impactful thing from the many years we've journeyed there is the comment that there was nothing exceptional about Emmett Till. The residents say they were always retrieving bodies from the river. The only thing that was exceptional in this case was his mother, who made the determination that they weren't just going to bury him and cover it up, but of course made it public for the world to see. And many freedom fighters who saw that picture. That was their entry in the movement. That's what gave them the courage to become a part of change.
Do you remember how old you were when you first heard the story of Emmett Till?
I was pretty young. I had a very interesting upbringing. I grew up in a household of educators, storytellers, historians, activists, pastors, preachers, a lot of conversations. And so I had to be 7 years old when I came into an awareness of Emmett Till, and probably around the same time saw a picture, which I didn't understand what had happened to him, but my introduction to the history was fairly early on. Yeah. Yes.
Something that I thought was interesting that you have Medgar Evers and then Emmett Till right there.
Right.
And I didn't know until I watched the movie Till this last, when it came out, that Medgar Evers was inspired by his story.
Yeah.
He became active because of that.
So
Like,
many.
replacement with it was really awesome.
So many. John Lewis. I mean, you can literally go down the list of people who were either young adults or young children. Muhammad Ali. You know, this was, if I could put it in kind of historic terms, this was the George Floyd of that era. This was the grand awakening for a generation. And a lot of people made the decision that they were going to be a part of change because of this young boy's murder.
And his mother's decision.
Another woman, right, who changed the world courageously.
I'm not going to hide this.
I'm not going to hide this. You're going to have to look and see this. And you know, if you've seen the movie or you've heard the history, there were so many attempts to try to cover it up. So she had absolute courage to make this happen. Yeah. All right. The next morning, after a good night's rest, the bus rolled on. Soon, Mr. Joe announced from the driver's seat, "We're here. Welcome to Memphis, Tennessee." As the bus stopped, Liberty saw a building with many matching doors, each with a different number. A large round wreath hung near number 306. As everyone looked quietly at door 306, Liberty's mom told her that this was a place where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed. Liberty felt sad when she remembered that Dr. King had had children who were just like her. And then she thought about what Dr. King had done to help bring people together. Her dad had told her about Dr. King's dream for a better day when everyone would be treated equally. Liberty liked the sound of Dr. King's deep voice. She heard it on a recording of his "I Have a Dream" speech. As everyone looked around, she and Abdullah took turns trying to sound like Dr. King. They couldn't help laughing. Even though the Lorraine Motel was a serious place, Liberty imagined that Dr. King had liked to laugh just like her dad did with her. Amazing thing happened this summer with the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, which is the site of the assassination, which is that there is a reading series called Small But Mighty Stories that the center engages in. And of the 4 books chosen for this series, along with Amanda Gorman's recent book, was Liberty's Civil Rights Road Trip. And the amazing thing was that it was actually read in front of the wreath, which is just amazing. But then that's not all. In August, they invited Liberty and I to come to join Ruby Bridges for her reading festival. So our family met Ruby Bridges, and so then Liberty and I did a joint reading in front of the wreath at the Lorraine Motel, Liberty Civil Rights Road. Isn't that amazing? It just, you know.
Isn't it amazing?
It's just it's unbelievable.
That she got to meet Ruby Bridges?
She got to meet Ruby Bridges. She held her book up at the center. She did, she was so
have y'all read Robert Cole's book about Ruby Bridges?
I don't think I've had the chance to do that.
Oh, no. I need to get that for you.
I would love to.
I will get that for you.
Yeah.
Robert Cole was I guess he's not alive anymore. One of I determined in retirement I was going to go back and read everything Robert Coles wrote. I just thought he was a really interesting psychologist and recovered stories that needed to be told. And the one of Ruby Bridges is amazing.
Very quickly, so we were doing a book signing as well, and Liberty was signing books. And it was, it's hilarious, but I really enjoyed it. Everyone that came by, they were like, all the kids were like, Yeah, okay, yeah, right there. Can we get Liberty to sign it?
We just want
Can we take a
Liberty.
picture with Liberty? Oh my gosh, it was just so wonderful
So
to see.
did you have any comments about the day?
You know what?
Or was she,
just
or is she like Jeremiah, like, I'll think about it and talk
you know
later?
what? Just her joy was palpable.
Yeah.
You just could see it, and really, wow, it's amazing to see how young children can be an inspiration to other young children. So there was something about her being in a book and her reading in this context that I think increased the interest of the young people. There's a ton of young people there to learn more about their history. Yeah.
And this was done at the Lorraine Motel.
It was done at the Lorraine
Cent-
Motel,
yeah,
right there.
right
She's
there.
here, Ruby Bridges is here. We're talking Ruby Bridges, another young lady who inspired movement, you know, as a child. So it was all very meaningful.
Children can change the world.
Children can and quite often do change the world. All right. Hours later on the bus, I didn't know I was going to have all these anecdotes. You said you can do that. I'm just going to read it straight through.
No. I just love anecdotes because they're things that come to mind.
Yes,
right?
a ton of things are coming to mind.
So you can do this again sometime.
Hours later on the bus, Mr. Adam nudged Liberty and Abdullah awake. We're here. Welcome to Birmingham, Alabama. We're at the 16th Street Baptist Church. As everyone left the bus, Liberty saw many stairs she could hardly wait to climb, across the street from a park full of trees. Can we go play? Asked Abdullah. Only after we pay our respects, said his mom. As they walked in, Liberty heard someone say that 4 girls had died at the church when a bomb went off a long time ago. She did not like that at all. Who were those girls? Liberty asked. They were friends who went to Sunday school together, and they sang in the children's choir, said Mr. Adam. I'm sure they liked to have fun together, but some people did not like that black people worshiped and fought for justice here. No one should be hurt in a church, Abdullah said. That's true, Abdullah, said his dad. And no one should be hurt in a mosque, a temple, a synagogue, or anywhere. Let me conclude this portion. Later, as everyone went outside, Abdullah shouted, "Come on, Liberty." They ran across the park and climbed trees until it was time for the bus to leave. Liberty wondered if the 4 girls had played there together before Sunday school. I think of the entire pilgrimage, this was the most impactful for Liberty. Once again, because she's like, girls died? This doesn't make any sense. And they died at church? And you can kind of see that wrestling happening right there, right? And so I think of all the experiences, that was really impactful. After meeting Miss Rudolph, Sarah Collins Rudolph, the 5th little girl, the one closest to the impact of the bomb, who lost an eye in that bombing.
And her sister.
Junie Collins. Her sister, Autumn Mae Collins, died. She lost an eye. She had another sister who experienced great trauma from that day. There's no way to sugarcoat this. You know, one, she's probably the most courageous woman I've ever met. If there's ever a woman who emulates the love of Christ, it's her. Does not have a hateful bone in her body. Loves everybody.
How do you think? Do you have a sense about how she's been able to live out?
It's a deep and abiding faith and trust in God. You don't accidentally get there. That's soul work. That's a commitment to Christ, a commitment to the Spirit at work within you, a commitment to the declaration of Scripture.
That hate is not going to take over your heart.
That's not going to take over. To love your enemies, to pray for them that harm you. I mean, that's the hard stuff in the gospel, and she lives that out. And to see her, you know, she's a senior woman now, but you know that you can still observe the scar tissue around that eye is still there, somewhat faded, but still there. But the thing that I think of her story that's just challenging is that for years after this bombing, debris that was blown into her skin would surface. And the process of it coming up would literally have her experience the pain all over again. I met and had conversations with John Lewis and so many other civil rights heroes. Jimmy Lee Travis, who was shot in the back of the head while working in Mississippi. And I've been close enough to them to observe their wounds. And I don't want to deify these individuals, but it's so similar to Christ in the sense that you can see the wounds that they bore on our behalf to bring about our liberation and the ongoing pain. So most people don't think about the bombing other than that it happened in this historic event. And yet here is a woman who still bears within her body the struggles of that time. And so I always want to uplift those stories because, too quickly we can forget. Right? All right. The next day, the bus rolled on to another city. Miss Ollie turned to Liberty. "We're here," she said. "Welcome to Montgomery, Alabama." "Whose house is this?" Liberty asked as everyone got off the bus in front of a small house with a large porch. When Dr. King was the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, this was his family's home, said Miss Alia. "They had some happy times here, but the porch still has a hole in it left by a bomb. Thankfully, everyone was okay. Even in danger, Dr. King and his wife, Coretta, didn't let anything stop them from helping others." Liberty and Abdullah knelt on the porch and put their hands into the hole. How had Dr. King and his family been so brave? Liberty wondered. The next day was the one Liberty had been waiting for. The bus rolled on and on. Finally, she shouted, "I see it. There's the bridge." "Yes, we're here," said Liberty's dad. "Welcome to Selma, Alabama." The bus stopped near one end of the bridge. As everyone got off, Liberty said, "Tell me again why this bridge is important, Dad." Her dad smiled. A long time ago, brave women, men, and children crossed this bridge as they marched from Selma to Montgomery. They wanted to send a message that the laws of Alabama should be the same as those across America, which said that every citizen could vote. Some marchers were hurt by police officers who thought black people shouldn't vote, but that didn't stop them. A few weeks later, they marched into Montgomery, 50 miles away. Black people can now vote in every state. This bridge is a symbol of everything people have faced to be seen as true Americans. It reminds us to be courageous as we work together to make our country better for all. Then he called out, "Let's march, everyone." That's my favorite picture, by the way.
This one?
This one.
Bridge?
The bridge, yeah.
I was going to say the bridge picture is
It's amazing.
is amazing. Do you want to tell us whose pictures are here? But we recognize some of them.
Sure. And so this is.
Tell us who. I'm sorry. Tell us who's in the pictures.
Well, yeah. This is a kind of framed capture of when they actually arrived in Montgomery. Of course, you see King and Coretta. This would be Reverend Reese here. Abernathy down here, a few other figures. Ralph Bunch here.
Is John Lewis with his backpack? I don't think
no, John Lewis is not depicted in this picture.
He's always got his backpack.
Yeah. And this is going to be the kind of triumphant entry into Montgomery after that march. It's kind of taken from that.
It is an incredible painting.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Liberty and Abdullah grabbed the nearest hands as everyone began to cross together, just like the first marchers. As they walked, Liberty thought about all the places she had seen and the brave people she had heard about. Then she turned and looked behind her, just as she did on that first day on the bus. So many people, all different, traveling together. Liberty's dad looked around and said, "This is what America looks like." Liberty wasn't quite sure what that meant, but she liked how it sounded. Liberty smiled at her dad and said, "Maybe this is what love looks like too." When the road trip had started, she had only known a few people on the bus. Now they were all part of her family. She didn't know where they would travel next, but she knew that wherever they went together, love would take them there. Liberty Civil Rights Road Trip. Thank you.
So at the back So at the back of the book, there are notes about the places that are visited and shown there, and then also a note from the author. You want to say anything about the note from the author?
Yeah.
Did you write that? Did you write that after you had written the story, or because one of the things I see a lot in sometimes in children's books, and I love it, is when you get a note from the author that talks about what they've just written. Because I love picture books because they're not just for children. Because sometimes adults need help telling the story too, or ways to think about telling the story or using the story. So,
Yeah.
what did you want to say there?
Sure. So I can remember writing both of these author's note for Beautiful Black Boys. I was actually sitting in a cafe in Midtown Manhattan, and just had the inspiration to write it there to talk about our family story. I wrote this after the deaths of both John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, both men who I had met and engaged in conversation, met John Lewis on a number of occasions. And just the proximity of their deaths together, basically died within 24 hours of each other, just took my breath away because it was so much loss. And one of the challenges of this work, if you will, particularly for me in this time, is that so many of my friends and mentors are transitioning. I never know, and particularly I think the pandemic kind of accelerated some things, but I never know when it's going to be the last time that I'm meeting with these people who mean so much to me. And you know, what I know is that so much of the history that has been shared with me has not been shared in books. I find myself quite frequently reading a book or hearing a talk, and I'm saying, nah, that's not how it happened. And it's not just because I have a different reading. That they literally told me, I've heard from the people, that's not what happened. I've sat down with Andrew Young, and Andrew Young said, yeah, King should have died in 63. It's a miracle he made it to 68. I've heard that, had that conversation. There were so many threats on his life that everybody mourns that he died at 39. We were amazed he made it, right? The backstories, the smuggling Dr. King in the back of car trunks in the narrow escapes, right? The miraculous things that happened, how the Freedom Riders still don't know how they made it out of that Montgomery bus station alive, but that somebody picked them up, grabbed them in a car and drove them to safety, and how that person, here, now we get to the mystical, now we get to the miraculous. Yeah. You know, somebody picked me up out of a mob, put me in the back of a car, dropped me off, and I never heard or saw them again. I can't tell you how I made it out safe. I don't know even how they got through all those people with those pipes and those batons. But here I am, right? The unction, right, to leave, and you leave just in time before a bomb explodes. Fred Shuttlesworth, right here in Birmingham, right? A bomb being placed literally under his bed. The bomb was under his bed, blowing up, throwing him 20, 30 feet in the air. He comes and lands on his mattress. And when the sheriff shows up and says, well, you know, I'm sure you'll be leaving Birmingham now, he says, no, if God can keep me here, he'll keep me through anything.
Give me more
God
mattresses.
Right. So I could go on and on, but there's so many stories.
The oral history.
The oral history. And that kind of leads me now, as you know now, I've recently begun a second doctorate, now a PhD in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. And a part of that interest is to capture these oral histories and provide a way in which the stories can be told and shared.
I think you've got your project. I think you've got your project.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah, I've got some more stories. There's like, I got to meet one of the, he was a freedom rider, but he also was one of those that was on the outside watching as they integrated the Walgreens in downtown Nashville. And he was one of those trained by Jim Lawson.
Wow.
And he just recently died, but I got to see him talk to middle schoolers and tell their stories and teach them the songs that they sang on the bus. Right. And I can tell you more later about that story, but it's those oral history, those stories that, as you said, have not been always written down. We've got a little bit of time left, and I want to see what questions or comments there are from either virtual or in participants here in the room before we move to a little closing that will involve you. Yes.
I had no idea what this talk was going to be about. I never met you, and obviously it's fascinating and extremely overwhelming to hear the heartbeat. And I think you'd agree, no doubt, that the Holy Spirit has set up these events with your son to be where you're at today. What do you see? What is your heart or your prophetic vision of the next 5 years?
So the question is, what is the heart of the prophetic vision that Mike sees in the next 5 years?
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the way the question is framed, because I very much so deeply believe that I have been entrusted with these stories, been gifted with access in some regards that very few people have had, and that comes with the responsibility to share the stories and to make sure that we remember, but not just remember, but that we act. I have a dear friend, rabbi in Dallas, who he once, just in the midst of conversation, he says, Mike, you know what the most repeated commandment in the Torah is? I said, you got me, I have no idea. What's the most repeated command in the Torah? He said, it's the command to remember. To remember. And so that's been a part of my work. And, you know, God has granted me some amazing experiences. This past April, I was in Riverside, at the Riverside Church in New York, alongside Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, doing a recitation of his Beyond Vietnam speech at the very place where he spoke. A few years ago, as they were dedicating the Malcolm X Center in New York, I was invited to speak. I'm literally speaking at the place where Malcolm X is slain before his daughter, who was there when he was killed in 1965.
So,
These type of stories, this kind of access comes with responsibility to share. So you asked me what my hope is, what I see in the next 5 years. I operate from a theology of hope. As you look in your books, I sign just about every book the same way, which is the manifest hope. I feel that we have a call to co-labor with God, to bring hope into harrowing spaces, and to believe that we have the power to bring about change. You'll hear echoes of this maybe in our message in a few hours, but no matter literally how dark the time might be, there's still hope for change. That's my North Star. That's what allows me to believe that after every Good Friday, there's a resurrection day on Easter, that Easter is coming, that we just have to be able to believe it and press through that place. So I believe that we have some hard days ahead. I'll be speaking at Oxford University in March. I'll be a part of a conversation on the rise of Christian nationalism in our country and the role that it is playing in our politics, from the national level to the local level. We've got serious issues that need to be addressed. And even as I am aware of that truth, I still operate with the lens of hope because I see people responding. I see communities standing up. I see people finding community with each other. And I just still believe, as fantastic a thought as it might be for some people, fanciful thought it might be for some people, I still believe that there is divine activity that manifests through human activity. I still believe that God chooses women, children, men, communities to bring about change in the world. And I am always encouraged when I see people who believe the same. So I believe we'll continue to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, but I know that it only bends if you bend it. And I'm committed to bending it alongside with each one of you.
On your table, there's some colored pieces of paper, and your table, you can borrow some from another table.
And then were you wrapping up? There are a couple of resources that we're missing.
Oh,
You want me to do that real quick?
sure.
There's just, if you want to hear more women's stories, the Novus Project, I believe it's novusproject.org, out of Savannah, Georgia, has a pilgrimage that lifts up the women of the movement.
Nobis,
Novus,
N-O-
B-I-S,
N-O-B-I-S, out of
Savannah, Georgia.
Savannah, Georgia, lifts
Pilgrimage lifts up the women of the movement.
the women of the movement.
And then for those who did visit the church or are planning to visit the church here in Birmingham, Lisa McNair, who was the younger sister of Denise McNair who died in the bombing, Lisa didn't actually ever, she wasn't born yet, but she had just published a book, Dear Denise,
Dear,
of letters to her sister.
Dear Denise, written by the sister of Denise who died in the bombing.
And Dr. Anne Marie Mingo has a book coming out, and I'll try to get that to you, on the women of the movement as well. She's a professor, was at University of Pennsylvania, but I will commend that to you. It comes out later this year.
On the table are some colored pieces of paper. Mike graciously gives us his time for 24 hours today before he heads to San Francisco, where he's a fellow in a group, and we had hoped he would be with us for tomorrow, but we made it work, and we are grateful. And he's going to leave here, and we're going to go sign some books in the bookstore, and you get to hear him this afternoon. So on the table are some colored pieces of paper. So Mike spends time away from his family when he does these things. So if you would like to write, those who are here in the room, a note, a blessing, a word, a scripture, anything to Mike or to members of his family that he could take with him, I invite you to do that. And for those who are with us virtually, if you want to put something in the chat feature, again, a word, a blessing, a hope for Mike, please do that, and we will write those down for him. Mike, one of the other, I hope when you do another civil rights road trip, you can add Boynton, Alabama, the G's Ben Quilters.
All right.
Do you know about the G's Ben Quilters? Have you
Tell
ever
me
heard
more.
of? The G's Ben Quilters are a remarkable group of women who survived the racism in the South, particularly when George Wallace was governor. And it's a small community, and they fairly isolated it, and he made it even more isolated in his racist acts. And they quilted, and they got together and they quilted, and
I've heard the story.
they had frames. They're wonderful YouTube videos. PBS did one. And they sing, and they stitch. And one of the ideas for this meeting was that our tables in our conference room, which you'll see when you preach this afternoon, we wanted something, because you always have to have something in the middle of your table. We're educators. You got to cover the table, right? So came up with the idea, my sisters, Kathy and Jenny, who've been chairing the local events, let's invite people to make quilts in the style of the G's Ben Quilters. And the G's Ben Quilters used whatever they had. They didn't have much, but they made quilts for their warmth, for their beds. And so they quilted in their own unique styles. They didn't follow patterns. They made up their patterns as you go. And they were discovered, and they've had exhibits in, I saw it in Milwaukee, I've seen it in Nashville. They were in Dallas, and they took the quilters with them on these trips. I had the honor of going to a workshop in Tuscaloosa with two of the descendants of the original G's Ben Quilters, who taught me how to make one square, and it doesn't have to be perfectly matched. So when you preach today, on the tables are the contributions from our community.
Beautiful.
For the table toppers, and there's one hanging on that box right there. And on Saturday, people will have the option to pay $20 to purchase one. Friday night, you can get one Friday night, and you can give $20 or more, and the proceeds are going to
Our mission project for the event, which is First Light Shelter, intimate violence shelter, and it's going to be split with the G's Ben Collective so that they can provide scholarships for people who would like to take one of their workshops.
Wonderful.
So money equally divided, and half of it will go also to the Gee's Bend Quilting organization, which is still alive and well in Gee's Bend, Alabama. And it's one of my dreams to go there sometime. But I'll leave you with that. We're going to close. First of all, just say thank you to Mike, and you can say your own individual thank yous, but unless you said you didn't know, you know what you're getting in for, but I knew from our conversation 3 years ago the depth and the invitation to the space. It's hard. I invite Mike to read one of his, is it a prayer, a poem? What would you call it?
Yes.
Yes, is the right answer. That he wrote. Did you write it here? Or did you write it after you got home?
Actually, I did. I wrote it here. I wrote it in Birmingham. I wrote it, as is often the case with me, inspiration comes and I've got to get it out.
So do you travel with a journal?
My phone.
You just do it on your phone?
Yeah, I just.
Okay.
There.
So I've asked him to read. It's in his book, which I commend to you if you want a book that. Sometimes I pick different kinds of books to read during Lent. Sometimes I read specifically books written for Lent, but sometimes I just want something else. And this was my something else. And it's a collection of writings, of articles from the Huffington Post. It's poetry, and you mentioned there's also you've also got a chapter in there
on Dallas.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So he's going to read.
Well, first again, thank you for the privilege of sharing space with you, with all of you, and thank you for your interest and support of these books. My greatest joy is that they find their way into the hands of young people, and you just never know how young people will be inspired or motivated to continue to bring about the change we need. But thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for sharing this space together. I'm going to read this. I also have a very wide collection of artifacts that I use in engaging in teaching and sharing. And I thought it was important to bring this one because it speaks to the harm and experience that young people have. It comes from our history. It's a little hard to see, but it's important. These are authentic plantation shackles from the Georgetown County Plantation Police. And the reason these are particularly important is because these are the shackles that were made for children or women. And so when we think about our racial history as a community, let's not forget that children have also been harmed. And that as we are seeking to uplift them and to impact them in positive ways, we should also be reminded of the harms they continue to experience today. If you'd like to engage these, look at these. I believe in democratizing history. And so these can be held, take a picture of them, look at them. But I wanted to bring these as we're talking about children's books to understand collectively the importance of our work together. So this piece was written here in Birmingham. It was written right down the street at Kelly Ingram Park as these wonderful children were playing in these trees in this place where water hoses and dogs were released against children protesters generations before. It's entitled Today. Today I watched black and brown children at play in a park where years before young children were met by fire hoses and canines, across from where 4 little girls died at church from a bomb, down the street from where a little boy was shot in the back by police the same day. And though knowing in America today, black and brown children are still shot by police in parks, Tamir Rice, say his name. And though knowing bans and threats of a wall descend upon brown people, separating brown children from their families. I am grateful that the arc still bends towards justice if you have the courage to bend it. Amen.
Blessings
Thank you.
and peace. As you can, blessings and peace as you continue your work. And may the arc of justice swing more widely with all of our hands. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you so much.